Hello everyone, this is Isha for Pinkfresh Studio, and I hope you are all having a wonderful day. In today's video, I'm creating a fun scenic card featuring the Holiday Express stencil set. Before we start, here is a quick look at the main supplies I'm using today. Holiday Express stencil set, single stitched rectangle dies, herb garden stamp and die set, steeped in kindness stamp, stencil, and die set. All the supplies are listed in the description box below, so be sure to check them out. Now, to create the scenic background, I am starting with the Holiday Express stencil set. This set comes with 8 stencils. 3 are for the trees, which I am not using today. So, I am working with the other 5 to build my background scenery. I am placing my cardstock panel onto a magnetic mat and I'm starting with stencil number 1. Since this stencil has a flap that wiggles a bit, I'm putting a magnet over it so it won't move while I ink blend. I am beginning with soft lilac ink, blending lightly across the top part of the panel. Then I am blending sky blue ink over about 2/3 of the panel to create a snow mountain backdrop. Because this is a large area, I am using a 1-inch blending brush to get a soft and even coverage. Next, I am wiping the stencil and moving to the tiny train headlights. I am adding sweet mustard ink to color them in, masking the surrounding sky and mountain area with post-it notes, so I don't accidentally add ink where I don't want it. At the bottom of the stencil, I am blending fresh pear ink to create the grassy foreground. I am imagining this as a spring scene inspired by views I have experienced in the Alps. So I want the fresh green tones to really shine. To add some depth, I am adding grassy knoll ink. Now I'm moving on to stencil number 2. Here I am blending Misty Coast ink onto the bridge pillars and tunnel. I feel it needs more color, so I am adding Rocky Slope ink to deepen the shadows. With stencil number 3, I am coloring in the train. I am starting with passion fruit ink and then I am adding candy apple ink to give it some depth, keeping the darker shades near the base of the train. For the cabins in the background, I am masking areas with post-it notes to create a tonal variation to give the illusion of depth. Playing with light and shadows gives us a beautiful and more interest to the card, and it also gives some movement. Next, I'm switching to stencil number 4, where I'm coloring the top and front of the train. Again, I'm using passion fruit ink with a 1/2-inch blending brush. Start with a lighter hand and then add pressure to give more pigment to the image. Moving on to stencil number 5, which has the tunnel and the windows. I am starting with Rocky Slope ink on the tunnel. And then I am adding a soft touch of sky blue ink. The variation in color is not noticed much in the video, but in real life it looks really pretty. For the cabin windows, again I'm using Rocky Slope ink. Now I'm shading with Metropolis ink over the bridge and the windows to give some more depth and darker areas. On the left hand side, there is a mountain, and because I'm creating a spring scene, I want to mask it so that we won't get the gray color onto where we want the green. Wipe the stencil so we won't get the contamination of gray ink onto our green ink. Now for the mountain, I am blending fresh pear ink with a 1-inch brush, and then I am adding shadows using grassy knoll ink for the slopes. This red train is depicting Switzerland, where you often see vibrant trains winding through the bridges and mountains on the scenic routes. That's my inspiration behind this background. Here I am using the single stitch rectangle dies to create a frame by nesting the first and the third dies together. My idea is to layer vellum behind the frame. So the whole scene looks like I am viewing it through a window. I'm stamping the large floral cluster onto white cardstock. I'm rubbing the stamp with my fingers to remove any oily residue, and then using detail black ink, I'm going to stamp it. Next, I'm going to color it using the coordinating stencils. For that, I have secured my cardstock panel to the magnetic mat using washi tape. Now, starting with stencil number 1, which has the big flower and the bird, I'm starting with the flower first using sweet mustard ink. Here I'm concentrating more color on one side of the flower for tonal variation. For the bird, I am blending mango sorbet ink. I'm focusing it more onto the belly of the bird, and then I'm adding a touch of raspberry bliss ink for a corally peach tone. You can always mix and match colors to create new colors or new shades of colors. Moving on to stencil number 2, I am adding candy apple ink to deepen the bird's wings. For the smaller flowers, first I am blending soft lilac ink evenly with a light pressure. And then I am shading with raspberry bliss ink. Remember to tap your brush onto the side because raspberry bliss ink is quite pigmented and we don't want any splotches. To tone down the flowers slightly, as raspberry bliss ink is quite bright color, I'm using the candy apple ink. With stencil number 4, I'm focusing on the foliage. I'm blending grassy knoll ink to the leaves and I'm keeping it the most concentrated to the base of the leaves. And then I'm adding olive ink towards the base of the leaves for more depth and dimension. Notice I'm using a 1/4 inch brush here. On stencil number 3, I'm coloring the additional flowers with waterfall ink, starting lightly for the base flowers, and then for the top buds, I am using sweet mustard ink. I'm going to deepen the base of the yellow buds with mango sorbet ink. Stencil number 5 adds more foliage layers and the leaves veins, and for that I am using olive ink. And finally, stencil number 6 is the flower centers. Here I am using Metropolis ink first, and then I felt that I need some deeper color. So I'm darkening it with licorice ink for a stronger contrast. Once the coloring is complete, I'm die cutting the entire floral cluster with the coordinating die. Next, to add more layers and interest to the cluster, I'm using the Herb Garden stamp set to create some soft vellum accents. I'm preparing the vellum with a powder tool so the embossing powder won't stick where we don't want it. Stamp the images in calico white ink and sprinkle with white embossing powder from Wow. Tap to remove extra powder, and then I'm going to heat set it using a heat tool. Here I'm die cutting the images with the coordinating dies. These vellum pieces will add fullness and a delicate touch to the cluster without overpowering the main design. Now that we have all the images and elements ready for our card, it's time to put everything together. I'm adhering a vellum panel to the Scenic train panel. This will show through from behind my stitched rectangle frame. So it looks like I'm gazing through a window. Then I'm arranging the floral cluster at the bottom and behind the frame. And usually we have lots of red geraniums on our windowsills. So it's really it really feels like home. Finally, I'm adding some of the vellum leaves behind the cluster to add texture and layering. Once I'm happy with the arrangement, I'm adhering everything in place, and then I'm using foam tape behind the frame to pop it up against the background panel, giving the card dimension. For the sentiment, I'm stamping with love from the Steeped in Kindness set in detail black ink. Die cut it using the coordinating die and adhere it with a foam tape over the scene. To finish, I am adding a few iridescent dewdrops near the sentiment for a subtle sparkle and focal point. And that finishes my scenic card for today. I really love how this project turned out. The red train, the spring mountains, and those bright florals all coming together through the window frame. Thank you so much for joining me today. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notifications so you never miss out on new crafty inspiration. And I hope this inspires you to try mixing your supplies and creating your own scenic cards. See you next time. Happy crafting and bye bye.